All right, so I'm excited for today's class today, class number 2 of how to build a successful major donor program for your nonprofit. Today's class is going to be all about how to ask for major gifts and keep your donors giving for a lifetime. For those of you who are unfamiliar with CauseVox is a digital fundraising platform that helps you raise more with less effort. You can use our, all right. We'll give everyone just like a minute or two to get signed on. Hi, Amy. Thanks for joining. All right. I think it's the perfect time to get started with our class today. So, yeah, thank you for joining. Today's class is all about how to ask for major gifts and keep your donors giving for a lifetime. So let's get right into our class today. I'm just going to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. If you're interested in learning more about how you can use CauseVox for your digital fundraising, for donation pages, crowdfunding, peer-to-peer fundraising, and event ticketing, feel free to reach out to me. So yeah, the other day we went over all about how you can find new major donors and build relationships with them. So that was Tuesday's class. You should have gotten a recording of that in your inbox already, but you'll get both recordings in our follow-up email that goes out on Monday. And yeah, so for today we're doing class number 2, all about how to ask for major gifts. So as a quick overview, you are going to get all of the slides from class 1 and class 2, access to the recording of class 1 and class 2 to replay anytime, and share it with your team if you want. You're also going to get Joe's Asking Scripts guide. So these are downloadable templates that will actually help you with all of your outreach and really implement your major donor program. So keep an eye out for those in that follow-up email that goes out on Monday. If you want to use CauseVox to run your fundraising online, feel free to use our basic plan. It is free. Or if you want to chat with me more about how you can really ramp up and power up your online fundraising, just let me know and we can always set up a time to chat. Or if you just want to chat with me to get my opinion about how you can grow fundraising at your organization, I'd be happy to offer a one-on-one consultation with you as well. So feel free to take advantage of that. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to get started with class number 2.
All right. Thanks, Candace. Thanks to everybody who's here with us today and also watching on the recording. I'm going to switch over to slides. And there we go. Can we see that, Candace?
Yeah, looks good.
All right, fantastic. So thanks again, everybody. This is Joe Gorecht, and I want to welcome you back to the second module of our class, How to Build a Successful Major Donor Program for Your Nonprofit, offered in partnership with CauseVox. And I'm so glad to be joining you for this class. The second module is called How to Ask for Major Gifts and Keep Your Donors Giving for a Lifetime. Now, as you'll recall, in our first module, we talked about how to find and cultivate major donors. And in this module, we're going to be talking about how to ask for major gifts and steward your major donors. So specifically, here's what we're going to be covering in this class. First, we're going to take a look at the major donor mindset, so you know what your major donors are thinking about when you ask them for a gift. Then you'll learn how to craft a great major donor ask. What does that conversation actually look like? After that, we'll talk about how to thank and recognize your major donors the right way. And finally, we'll talk about how to steward your major donors so they give year after year, so they upgrade their gifts and more. So, if that sounds good, let's get started. And the first thing I want to start with is to talk to you about the major donor mindset. When you go into an ask, it's extremely important to understand your donor's mindset. Remember, while you may be nervous or anxious about the ask or thinking about how much your organization needs this money, the person sitting across the table from you or who's on the other end of the phone or the other end of the Zoom meeting is a real, live, breathing, living human being. She or he has thoughts, feelings, and ideas of their own. The mindset of your donor should inform your asks and will definitely impact the success of your efforts. While every donor is different, I've found that there are 7 essential principles that form the foundation for most donors' mindsets when they're going into an ask with you. The first is this: people don't like to feel like they're being sold. Whether it's a used car salesperson, an insurance agent making a cold call, or a nonprofit fundraiser making an ask, people don't like to feel as if they're being sold something. That's why the best salespeople in the world use conversations to draw out the wants and needs of their buyers, and then they present them with a product or service that fills those needs. That's why insurance agents make most of their sales through referrals by friends, family, and current customers. And that's why nonprofit fundraisers need to cultivate first and ask second. People don't want to feel as if your nonprofit is selling them something. They worry that they'll make a donation to you and wake up the next day with donor's remorse, which is a real thing. The best way to overcome this fear is to build a relationship with your prospect. Find out what they are interested in, what programs or services that you offer are most important to them, and how they want to give. Make your cultivation and your ask about them, not about you. The second key thing to remember is that people want to give. While people don't want to feel like they're being sold, they do like to give. People like to give to nonprofits. Giving makes them feel good and provides them with very real psychological or spiritual rewards. Make it easy for them to give. Paint a compelling picture. People want to say yes, they want to give and be helpful. And if you build a relationship with them and paint a big enough vision, they'll want to give and be helpful specifically to your nonprofit. The third key thing to remember about your donor's mindset is that people don't give unless they're asked. This is a key point that needs to be driven home for every organization. For the most part, people don't give unless they're asked. Rare indeed is the situation where your nonprofit receives a sizable donation from a person or company without first asking that person or company to donate. People want to give, but they won't give unless you ask them to do so. Far too many nonprofits are never willing to make real, honest to goodness, person to person asks. Sure, they'll send out event invitations and appeal letters and they'll post about their fundraising needs on social media, but they'll never sit down with a donor or pick up the phone to make an ask. And then they'll wonder why they never get any major gifts. The reason why is because they aren't making personal asks. People don't give unless they're asked, and in most cases, people don't give major gifts unless they get a personal ask in the form of a visit, phone call, or video conference. The other major problem I see with nonprofits is the belief that because they're doing good work, if they just get their name out there and get some brochures into the right hands and get a couple of good stories in the local paper and spend some time at events and tours talking about how much money they need to keep operating, that the money will keep rolling in. Nothing is further from the truth. Mentioning how much money you need is not an ask. Talking about how much money you need and then directly asking someone in person or on the phone to give a certain portion of that amount, well, that's an ask. The fourth thing to remember about your donor's mindset: people want to understand where their money is going. Prospects feel much better about saying yes to your asks when they understand where their money is going. If you ask someone for $100,000, he or she wants to know what that money will be used for. If you need a host committee member to sell 10 tickets to your event at $100 per ticket, they want to know why you need to raise another $1,000 for this event for your nonprofit. So, do you know why you need the money? Does your staff know why you need the money? Can the staff and board and your fundraising volunteers all explain in a succinct and clear manner why you need to raise the money that you're going to raise? How much does it cost you to serve one more meal, to do one more operation, to accept one more child into your school, to provide one more scholarship? Whatever your nonprofit's mission is, break down your program budget into bite sized chunks. If you're approaching a donor who has a heart for serving the poor and asking her to make a $50,000 gift to your soup kitchen, and you can explain that the $50,000 will allow you to serve another 25,000 hot meals this coming year, well, that's far more powerful than simply asking for the cash for general purposes. Also, be transparent with your donors. Your prospects, particularly your larger donor prospects, they will understand that a certain portion of every dollar donated goes to cover what they would think of as overhead expenses. But you need to be prepared to explain how those overhead expenses really are program expenses, right? Because everything you do to keep the lights on allows you to carry out your mission. So keep that reasonable and be willing to share with your donors what amount of their donation or what amount of your money goes to these kind of hidden program expenses that we call overhead expenses. The fifth thing to remember about your donors' mindset: people want to know they're making a difference. If your nonprofit doesn't have a big vision, or if you're doing the same thing this year as last year, serving the same number of people, or carrying out the same activities, it's going to be very hard for donors to understand why they should make a big donation to your organization. Donors want to know that they're making a difference and moving the dial. It's easier to make asks and raise money when your organization has a big vision and can articulate that vision for donors. Allow your prospects to make a big impact by donating to your organization. If you ask them to make a big gift to simply maintain the status quo, they will likely donate elsewhere. The sixth thing to remember: people need to have their objections answered, even if they don't mention them. Just as in sales, your donors will have objections when you make asks, meaning they will have concerns. And again, just as in sales, they may not always voice those objections. It is your job as a nonprofit fundraiser to anticipate those objections based on the relationship you have with the prospect and to answer them quickly and convincingly. Some of the most common objections donors have are thinking that the donation won't make a real difference in the world, not trusting that the organization will use the money as you say you will. They could worry that the organization won't be able to accomplish your mission. They could worry that once the organization receives the money, the donor will stop having input at your nonprofit. Or they could maybe not understand the terms and conditions of the gift agreement or the project you've put in front of them. The best thing your development staff can do if they anticipate an objection in the donor's mind is to bring it out into the open and answer it. For example, you could say, Mr. Welsh, it seems like you're concerned that you won't have ongoing input into the Help a Student Fund at our organization once your $1 million gift is used to establish it. My suggestion would be that we create an advisory board for the fund and that you could chair that board, which will have input into the use of these funds. Would that be something you're interested in? Notice you're not giving Mr. Welsh a seat on your organization's board of directors, though that could be a possibility depending on the size of a gift you get and the size of your organization. Instead, you're creating an advisory group to help oversee the fund that's being created with Mr. Welsh's sizable donation and thus anticipating and answering his concerns. And then the seventh and final thing I want you to remember about your major donor's mindset is that people want to give to organizations they trust. It's imperative for your organization to establish trust with your prospects and donors. People give to organizations they trust. Nothing is a bigger deal breaker than a lack of trust. The way to develop trust is through the ongoing cultivation process, as well as being open and transparent with your donors. So, offer facility tours. People want to see what goes on in your office. Print up annual reports, including full financials. Donors want easy access to your financial information. Gather data showing the effects of your work. People want to be sure that your nonprofit is making a difference. And sometimes the only thing that really proves this is cold hard numbers. Collect stories about the impact that you're making on those you serve. Donors want to feel good about the work they're funding. And last but not least, be accessible. If a prospect or a donor calls your office and no one answers, and no one calls him or her back for a week, you're going to seem unprofessional and unworthy of a donor's trust. Now, it's important to remember that fundraising is all about building relationships. People give based on relationships, both relationships with your organization as well as relationships with the people at your organization. Take the time to build interpersonal relationships with your prospects. Spend some time getting to know them, then make your asks. So many nonprofit organizations get so excited about making asks that they jump right into them. I can't tell you how many organizations I've worked with where the board or top level management pressured the development director or other fundraisers to make asks before donors were ready. Many times, these were situations where someone had a great idea for who to ask for money and got frustrated when the development staff member had a meeting with the prospect but never asked for a check. Don't be pressured into making asks before prospects are cultivated. Cultivation is important and should always precede the ask. That being said, cultivation needn't take forever. Rare is the donor that can't be moved from initial meeting to initial gift in 4 to 6 months. Now, before going any further, let's take a minute to define exactly what we mean by an ask. Nonprofit asks aren't always for money. Most of the time they are, but they can also be for other things. You could be asking someone to host an event, asking someone to serve on a committee, asking someone to open up their network to you, to refer donors to you, to volunteer, asking someone to come to an informational or point of entry event. These are still asks. You're still asking someone to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do, and that has a cost in terms of time, money, or energy. The step by step ask conversation that we're going to discuss in a few minutes can apply for all nonprofit asks, not just asks for money. But most of the time, you'll be asking for a monetary gift for your nonprofit. Now, before you ask any donor for anything, be sure to ask yourself the following two questions. First, who am I asking? It's important to know your prospect. So, who are you asking? What do you know about this person? During your cultivation of the prospect, did you find out what parts of your cause matter most to her or him? Have you crafted an ask tailored to this specific prospect based on his or her insights and desires? And second, what am I asking for? How much money are you asking this person to give to your organization? During the cultivation phase, did you figure out what this person's giving capacity is? Or did you at least research their capacity online? What type of gift are you asking for? Capital campaign, annual fund, endowment, planned giving? Are you asking for a one time gift or a multi year commitment? What are the terms and conditions? Do you have a gift agreement prepared? Etc. Who are you asking and what are you asking for? Now, let's turn our attention to the ask itself. When it comes to making the actual ask, meaning actually saying the words face to face or on the phone, how do you put yourself in the best position for success? I've learned that there are three key features that make up every good ask, and I call them the three B's, B-E. Every ask must be these three things in order to be as successful as possible. First, the ask must be a question, meaning that it starts with words like will you, or would you be willing, or would you be able. When you talk to someone but don't actually ask a yes or no question, it's not really an ask. Saying things like, I hope at some point you'll consider a gift to our organization, or I'd really like it if you'd take some time to consider your involvement with our nonprofit, those are not effective ways to make a fundraising ask. Second, the ask must be a concrete step. Usually that step is going to be writing a check or swiping a credit card, but could also be to come to an event or to volunteer or whatever. You need to ask for a concrete step. You must be asking the person to take action. If you ask someone, would you be willing to think about your role with our charity? That's not a concrete ask. But as noted above, most of the time, the concrete step will be to ask for a donation to your nonprofit. So the ask must be an actual question, and it must be a concrete step. And finally, it must be specific. That means you should ask for a specific amount, or a specific attendance at a specific event, or volunteer hours for a specific project, whatever. Asking, would you contribute $5,000 to our school, is at least 10 times more effective than asking your prospect, would you make a contribution to our school? One's specific and anchors the donation amount in the prospect's mind, and one is very inspecific. Likewise, asking someone, will you come to an event sometime, is not nearly as effective as asking, will you come to the chili cook-off on January 29th? When people are asking for a specific amount or to take a specific action, they are much more likely to give, and are much more likely to give at a higher level. All right, now over the past 2 decades in fundraising, I've found that the best way to make an ask is by following a simple 6-step process. I recommend learning this process, this ask conversation, practicing it, and using it during your ask. 6 steps may sound like a lot, but when we get into it, you're going to see it's quite natural. As you practice with live donors, the process will become second nature. So here's the conversation you should be leading your donors through as you make asks in person, over the phone, or through Zoom. All right, here's step number 1 of the conversation. Get the pleasantries out of the way. You've cultivated this person. You've learned a little bit about them. Now it's time to talk about the kids, the family, work, the last time you saw the person, etc. There's going to be small talk, so get it out of the way first. This could be the shortest part of your conversation, or it could be the longest part of your conversation. Whatever it is, make that small talk and reestablish that relationship. The second step is to make a transition. Once the small talk is out of the way, make a transition so that people know the topic has changed to something far more serious. Good transitions include things like, listen, I want to talk to you about something important, or here's the reason I came to see you today, or I've got a serious question for you, or Jane, I need your help. After making the transition and moved on to the more serious conversation, it's time to make the connection. Remind the prospect of the connection that they have with your organization. For example, you could say, Jim, you've been on the advisory board of the Farmers Assistance Fund for 3 years now. Or Colleen, you've been to 3 events at the Rising Sun School now and have volunteered at our annual community day for the past 2 years. Or just the first time I met you was at blah, blah, blah event, and I've really enjoyed talking to you several times since then. Make that connection. Step number 4, make them cry. Well, that might be a little bit overboard, but you do want to get emotional. You want to make sure that the person you're talking to understands the impact of your nonprofit's mission. Remind them what your charity does and why it's important. So, good examples could be things like, Samuel, every day, hundreds of people are diagnosed with XYZ disease, and each year 2,500 people die because they can't afford the medication they need to treat their affliction. Or, Janet, I'm heartbroken when I look into the faces of these former child soldiers. I see such pain, and I can't believe we don't have the resources to help every single one of them. This is the part of the conversation where you can tell stories about your work and about the people you help. Step number 5, make them understand why you need what you're asking for. Make them understand the need. This is the background for your specific ask. Why are you asking someone to give $5,000 to your nonprofit? You could say something like, we want to serve more hungry families, or this year we want to provide 10 more scholarships to needy children. Then make the ask. Remember to follow the 3 rules, the 3 B's that I gave you earlier, right? It has to be a question, it has to be concrete, and it has to be specific. Now, that may seem like a complicated formula, but once you practice it a few times, you'll see that it's actually quite natural and makes for a pleasant experience. So, using this formula, here's what an ask might sound like. This is a shortened version, right? Hi, Mike, how are you? How are the kids? That's the pleasantries. Listen, I've got something important to ask you. That's the transition. I've enjoyed our conversations over the past few months. Your advice has been invaluable in helping us raise the profile of the free clinic this year. That's making the connection. Every time I visit the clinic, I see the nicest families who seem just like mine, only they can't afford even basic medical care for their children. I see the kids who have to be admitted because their families couldn't afford antibiotics for a simple infection. It's so sad. That's make them cry. Mike, right now we can only serve about 50,000 or 50% of the families who need our help. Our goal is to be able to serve every single family and child that needs medical care at the clinic. We need to raise another $100,000 to make that dream a reality. That's make them understand the need. Would you be willing to contribute $25,000 to help us reach that goal? That's making the ask. It's that simple. You're asking the prospect to join you in carrying out your organization's mission and vision. You're inviting them to invest in a better world, and then you're leaving the decision up to them. Now, there is a secret, I call it the secret seventh step in the six-step ask conversation that most fundraisers don't know or understand. And that secret step is once you make your ask, be quiet. Many fundraisers end up talking themselves out of gifts or into accepting lower levels of gifts because they chatter away after the ask before the donor has a chance to say yes or no. After you ask for a gift, let your donor think. If your donor is silent for a long time, you might worry that they're mad at you for asking or that they're upset about the ask amount. But those things are almost never true. Instead, your donor's probably thinking about a way to say yes. They may need to figure out how they can afford the gift or whether they need to check with their spouse or business partner or what account to write the check out of. Fundraisers who feel the need to jump in to break the silence will almost always talk themselves out of the gift. Or they start saying things like, if you can't afford the $10,000 I asked for, 5,000 would still be a huge help. Saying things like this will immediately make your donor stop considering the $10,000 gift, even if they have the capacity and the desire to do so, because you've just told them that they only need to give 5,000 to make an impact. So don't talk yourself out of a gift. Instead, make your ask and then sit quietly until your donor gives you an answer. I also want to take a moment to talk about something that works for many nonprofits in many situations, something that seems counterintuitive, but which can often work really well in lots of situations. This idea works particularly well for major donors and for major donor asks where your organization has a long history with the donor or where the donor has gotten really involved with your organization, even for a short amount of time. The idea is to ask for permission to ask before you actually ask. All right. Asking for permission to ask. Here's how the strategy works. Let's say you've got a donor who has given you annual gifts each year for the past few years and who has also donated to a number of events and other special campaigns. Now you want to ask that donor for a major gift to support one of your programs. Instead of just setting up a meeting to make an ask, you call the donor, explain the program, tell them why you think they'd be interested, and ask them if they'd be willing to take a look at a proposal for supporting the program. In essence, you're asking them for permission to make an ask. If you have properly cultivated the donor and built a strong relationship with him or her, it's highly likely that they'll respond, sure, send it over. I'd love to take a look. Then you can send over a proposal for their support in written form and follow up with a call. By saying yes to you sending over the proposal, the donor has given you a small yes that will often lead to a bigger yes, which is saying yes to giving you the gift. All right, that was asks. We've talked about how to make a great ask. What about stewardship? How do you steward your major donors so they keep giving year after year? Well, the stewardship process for your major donors starts the minute their gift comes in. And that first phase is focused on how you thank your donors for their gift. It's crucial that when a gift comes into your nonprofit, you send a thank you note out to the donor as soon as possible. My suggestion for major donors is to send a handwritten thank you note in addition to the tax receipt that's generated by your donor database or other software. When it comes to written thank yous, make sure the receipt you send is not also trying to do double duty as a thank you letter. I have seen far too many nonprofits try to make the receipt into a thank you note by adding a paragraph or two. But this looks like what it is, a form letter that's attempting to be an easy print it and forget it type of donor communication. Now, some nonprofits who use my strategy for sending out both a gift receipt and a separate thank you note will send them in different envelopes, meaning that the donor will get two acknowledgments in the mail. I don't think this is necessary. And in fact, I found that it confuses some donors who wonder why they got two acknowledgement letters for just one gift. For major donors, I like to send both a customized handwritten thank you note and a typed tax receipt for the donation in the same envelope. And I also like to handwrite the mailing address on the envelope. You should always send a snail mail thank you letter, even if the gift was given online, and even if your online giving system automatically kicks out an email receipt. If your system does automatically kick out a receipt, you should customize it if you're able. Remember, the more customization you do, the better your donors will feel about their growing relationship with your nonprofit. And when it comes to major donors, in addition to the thank you letter, there's another crucial step in the thanking process. Did you know that one of the best ways to keep donors giving year after year is to call them to thank them immediately after you receive their gifts? At some nonprofits, but not all, when a major gift arrives, the donor receives a thank you call from the fundraising team or the executive director. But many organizations figure they don't need to make calls to major givers after the gift because they just had a conversation to solicit the gift and they don't want to overwhelm the donor. And most nonprofits never call lower dollar or mid level donors to thank them for their gifts. And these could be costly mistakes. In her research into donor stewardship and retention, Penelope Burke, the founder or the author of Donor Centered Fundraising, found that a phone call from a board member or senior employee at a nonprofit within 48 hours of receiving a gift resulted in donors giving an average of 39% more over the course of their lifetime to that organization. Think about it. Your nonprofit could raise 39% more than it does today from major donors without making any additional asks, just by promptly calling each of your donors after their gifts come in to say thank you. Now, in my experience, there are a number of reasons why donor thank you calls are so effective in increasing donor engagement and lifetime donor value. So here they are. First, they confirm receipt of the donation. A prompt donor thank you call lets the donor know that his or her gift was received by the organization. This provides instant gratification. Instead of waiting around for weeks to get a written thank you letter, the donor knows that the gift made it through the mail or was received online and was, however it was made, was safely received by the nonprofit. Second, they put a human touch on the relationship. Thank you calls are much more personal than thank you letters. If I mail a donation into your nonprofit and receive a thank you letter in the mail, it's all very impersonal. In fact, it may seem as though you simply personalize and print out a form letter and send it to me automatically. Calls, on the other hand, put a human touch on the relationship that helps to grow the bond between you and the donor. Donor thank you calls also provide a good excuse for you to speak to your donor in person. In other words, they're an easy donor touch point for your nonprofit. Donor thank you calls are low pressure and relaxed ways to build more personal interaction between your donors and your fundraising team. And finally, getting a personal call from a board member or other senior team member from your organization makes donors feel like they're an important part of your nonprofit. Calls show heartfelt gratitude and give donors the sense that they matter. If I make a small gift to your nonprofit and I get a thank you call in return, I know that my donation makes a difference. The goal for your organization should be to build a donor thank you call system to call as many donors as possible within about 48 hours of receiving their gift. This includes gifts of all sizes made through every medium. Now, of course, depending on the size of your organization, you may not be able to call personally every donor at every gift level, and that's okay. But do your best towards working towards a goal of calling 100% of your donors. If you can't call every donor, set a cutoff for which donors will receive gifts, with larger donors getting priority. You may decide to call every donor who makes a gift of in excess of 1,000 or 500 or $100. If necessary, put together a thank you call team consisting of board members, your CEO or executive director, your development director, and if necessary, other senior team members. Train your call team on how to make thank you calls and let them know how many calls they should expect to be making each week. Don't send out thank you call requests to the entire team. Instead, assign each call to a different team member. Your development staff should be able to email a donor's name, phone number, and gift amount to your call team members and know that that call will be made within the next 24 to 48 hours. Remember that thank you calls don't need to be long. The best thank you calls are short and to the point. Something like this. Desmond, this is Cara Delaney, a board member from the Joshua House Soup Kitchen. I'm calling to thank you for your generous gift of $500 to our organization. I just wanted you to know that it arrived and we really appreciate your support. That's it. The key is that the donor received the call, not that it was a long conversation. Sure, some donors may want to chat, but many simply say, "Oh, thanks, we're glad we could help." You can sign off with a simple "Take care. I hope to meet you in person at one of our events soon." And remember, never solicit another gift during the thank you call. They're not fundraising calls, they're thank you calls. Remember also that thank you calls don't replace thank you letters. Thank you calls should be made within 24 to 48 hours of receiving a gift, and you should then follow up with a thank you letter within the next 7 to 10 days. Donor thank you calls are an absolute necessity for nonprofit fundraising. They're a quick and relatively painless way to increase your revenue by 30% or more. If you're not already calling your major donors to thank them when a gift arrives at your office, you should consider building a donor thank you call system this year. All right, now beyond thanking your donors and recognizing them for their gifts by listing them on your website or in your annual report, how else should you go about stewarding your donors? Well, donor stewardship's a lot like donor cultivation, and it uses many of the same tactics. So let's quickly look at the 9 most popular and successful tactics for stewarding donors throughout the year, and these are in no particular order. Sending out snail mail newsletters and e-newsletters is probably the most popular way to steward your donors, particularly email newsletters. Newsletters and e-newsletters are easy to produce and send, and donors love getting them. They're a quick and easy way to keep your entire donor network up to date on what's going on at your nonprofit. I would suggest that if you have a donor list of any size, consider sending out an email newsletter at least once per month. Your website can also be a great way to steward your donors if you train them to check back in your site on a regular basis. Of course, the only way that people will want to visit your site regularly is if it is regularly updated and contains entertaining, emotional, or useful information. Modern website content management systems, such as WordPress, make it easy, even for non technically inclined staff, to make to make updates and keep your website up to date. Then you want to spread the word by telling your donors and prospects to check out the site on a regular basis and include the site's URL in every communication you send. Also, post special reports and other interesting one-off items on your site, and when you do, send out an email blast alerting donors that they can get their own copy by visiting your website. Another great way to steward your donors are non-ask events. I'm not going to go into length about non-ask events because we talked about them as a way to find new donors in the first module of this class. But suffice to say that holding non-ask events, meaning events where you're not asking for money, and that are the purpose is to either find donors or in this case to cultivate donors, is a great way to steward donors. Invite them to some free events. Make sure they get to spend some time with your team. Make sure they get to hear about the mission of your nonprofit, then send them home without asking for money. It really builds the relationship, and it makes sure that when you do make an ask, they're much more likely to give. Similarly, obviously, one-on-one and small group meetings where there's personal contact, whether it's going out to meet with someone at their office, whether it's doing breakfast or lunch or dinner, or a short 15-minute catch-up meeting at a donor's office. Those are great ways to check in with and steward your donors. As with one-on-one and small group meetings, personal phone calls can and should be used for non-ask purposes as well. The phone isn't just for asking for money; it's also a reason to call. You should also give yourselves reasons to call and check in and give updates and stay in touch with your donors to stay top of mind in between asks. These calls would not be to make asks. Participatory fundraising events, things like walkathons or collecting change like Operation Rice Bowl, or restaurant weeks where a number of restaurants all donate a percentage of profits to a charity, are all examples of what we call participatory fundraising. And while this is certainly fundraising, it can also be a great way to steward your donors. And I don't even consider this an ask. For the purposes of, I like to make sure that our donors are getting 2 to 3 asks per year, but through different methods, events, personal asks, letters, etc. I don't consider participatory fundraising an ask. All right, if you ask someone to walk in a walkathon or come to a restaurant event, you'll raise some money, but more importantly, your donors will feel a deeper connection with your organization by participating in these events, because they'll be working together alongside a group of people, the community your nonprofit has built to support your work, all towards a common goal. So it'll help them feel like part of your team. Letter writing campaigns, rallies, and other special action campaigns can help your donors feel like an important part of your team if they're appropriate for your nonprofit. So you can ask them to do that. And giving clubs and donor giving clubs and giving societies are a great way to steward your donors. Giving clubs are usually based on various levels of giving, meaning people who give between 1 and 5,000 are in one club, 5 to 25,000 per year are another club, 25,000 and more are another club. You could have a legacy giving club for donors who remember your organization in their will, etc. And what the levels are and the number of clubs you have at your nonprofit, that'll be based on your nonprofit size and your donor base. Giving clubs should offer different benefits to different levels, including exclusive events and newsletters, gifts, tickets to paid events, sponsorship opportunities, public recognition, etc. They're a great way to systemize your stewardship efforts. And finally, branded giveaways with your organization's name and logo can make great thank you and stewardship gifts for your donors. I particularly like lapel pins, which show off a person's involvement with your nonprofit. All right. So now you know the different ways to steward your donors. And I want to talk for a few minutes about why donor stewardship matters. A lot of people think donor stewardship is kind of wishy-washy. We have a responsibility to thank and recognize our donors, and that's true. If from an ethical perspective, I think that we do have that kind of responsibility. But bear in mind that there are actually some very real fundraising goals, measurable fundraising goals for your donor stewardship program. In fact, I believe that every nonprofit should have 3 very clear goals for donor stewardship. And the first is donor retention. Your first task after receiving a gift from a new donor is to get that donor to continue giving year after year. Ideally, new donors will become lifelong donors to your organization. Thus, you'll want to thank the donor promptly and keep communicating with them through your newsletter, your personal emails, your cultivation events, etc. Remember, though, that donors won't give again unless you ask, and so your objective is to make the donor feel like an important part of your team. Then, when the time is right, ask for a second gift. Then cultivate some more, and then ask for a third gift, etc. The only way to get your donors to keep giving year after year is to thank them for their gifts, recognize their efforts, continue to communicate with them, and then to ask them to give again. The second primary goal of your donor stewardship program is to get your donors to upgrade by giving a larger gift this year than they did last year. As you strengthen the relationship between your donors and the organization, donors will be willing to increase their investment in your work. Likewise, many donors will be willing to upgrade to monthly giving, major giving, planned giving, etc. Now, in order to get your current donors to upgrade, you have to ask. It's that simple. Most nonprofits never actually go out and ask their donors to give more this year than last year. The best upgrade asks are made directly in person or over the phone for major donors, and for lower dollar donors, you can also ask through the mail. Now, I have a four-step strategy, kind of the messaging or conversation that you'll want to have when you ask your donors to upgrade. The first step is to acknowledge the most recent gift, right? If you're asking a donor to upgrade, you want to recognize your donor for their recent gift and the money they've given you in the past. Thank them for their support and investment in your organization, and let them know the crucial role they play as part of your team. Then, second, you want to show the positive outcomes from the gifts they've given. Explain to your donor all the great things you've been able to do with their money, all the people that they've helped, all the good that's being done in the world because of them. Step number three is to explain why you need more money. All right, you're going to a donor who has already given you money to ask for a larger gift. Have things changed? Has your vision gotten bigger? Are you extremely close to a campaign goal and you're asking current donors for more support to get across the finish line? Are you launching a new project or trying to serve more clients? Explain to her or him why you need more this year than they gave last year. And step number four is to ask your donor to upgrade. Follow that six-step ask conversation. Make your ask concrete. Make it specific and ask for an actual amount. Don't make a statement like, well, we could really use more support. Don't ask for a wishy-washy amount. Don't ask for as much more as you can give. That's not an effective way to upgrade. Instead, ask the donor, would you be willing to give $50,000 over the next 2 years to help us achieve this goal? Make a plan for upgrading your donors each and every year. Smart nonprofits work with their major donors to try and upgrade them each and every year. All right, so the first two goals of your donor stewardship program were retention, getting last year's donors to give again this year, upgrades, getting last year's donors to give more this year than they gave last year, and third, get your donors to refer new donors. Now, we talked about this a little bit in the first class when we talked about referrals as a way to get new donors, but it's important. So I want to talk about it for just another minute. One of the absolute best sources of new major donor prospects for your nonprofit are referrals from current donors. Thus, the third goal of your donor stewardship program is to get your donors to open up their networks to your organization by referring you to their friends, neighbors, colleagues, business partners, family members, etc. You can then begin the process again by meeting and cultivating these new prospects. Almost every nonprofit organization wants to find new prospects, and this is a great way to do it. Your organization needs to be constantly finding prospects, putting them into the cultivation system, and the single best place to find new major donor prospects is inside your current donors' Rolodexes. So I want to encourage you to think in terms of what we call the two asks. Development professionals spend a lot of time talking about making asks, but we're usually only talking about the first ask, which is asking for money. We meet new prospects, we cultivate them, and then, when the time is right, we ask them to support our organizations with monetary gifts. Far too often, we don't ever get to the second ask, which is just as important as the first one. That second ask is, who else do you know who might be interested in learning more about our organization? The second ask will form a good portion of your strategy for finding a never-ending supply of new major donor prospects. Of course, you don't want to make both asks at once. You want to cultivate your donors and then ask them to make a monetary gift. Then steward them and keep getting them more involved. Later, as part of your stewardship process, you should ask them to open up their own Rolodex to help you find new donors for your nonprofit. I want to encourage you in this case to think like a salesperson. Doing fundraising is different from being a salesman in many ways, but there are a number of ways in which development professionals can learn from our counterparts in the sales world. One such concept we can learn from salespeople is the idea of a referral. Good salespeople are constantly asking their current donors and others in their network for referrals. Of course, when great salespeople ask for referrals, they aren't asking just for a name. They want their current client to introduce them to their friends and colleagues by way of a meeting, a call, or at least an email. This type of introduction reinforces to the new prospects that the salesperson is trustworthy and has a great product that might be helpful. So, when was the last time you asked for referrals? When was the last time you talked with your current donors to ask them to open up their Rolodexes and introduce you to their friends, neighbors, clients, vendors, and colleagues? And as we said earlier in the first class, asking for new names in the middle of a board meeting or event host committee meeting, that doesn't count. What I mean is, how many of your current board members and donors have you sat down with one on one as part of a cultivation meeting and directly asked, can you introduce me to 2 or 3 of your colleagues who might also be interested in learning more about our work? If you're not doing that, it's highly likely that you're having trouble keeping your prospect pipeline for major donors full. I always advise every nonprofit I work with to make the second ask or the referral ask a standard part of the cultivation and stewardship process for new donors and friends. Okay. I know that was a lot of information. I hope you found it helpful as you think through, particularly the major donor ask conversation, and as you practice that conversation, and also the stewardship process. Remember what we said, those 3 key goals for the stewardship process are so important. The stewardship process is not a wishy-washy process. All right. There are 3 measurable goals, and those goals are retention. How many donors are we retaining each year? Upgrades. How many donors are we upgrading each year, getting to give more money this year than last year? And referrals. How many of our donors are we asking to make referrals, to introduce us to new donors? Because we all know major donors tend to socialize with, work with, and be around other donors who have major giving or prospects who have major giving capacity. All right. Now I'd be happy to hand the floor back over to Candace and see if we have any questions. And certainly, if you're watching this recording, always feel free to send me any questions you have at my email address, which is on the screen. Candace?
Thank you so much, Joe. This has been such a great class, such great insights and really practical steps to really further those and deepen those relationships with those major donors. So yeah, thank you so much for giving us such a practical and systematic approach. I'm really excited to get everyone those asking scripts guides. I think that will really help people implement all the key learnings today. So thank you so much, Joe, for being here. I really appreciate it. So yeah, if there's any questions, we can go into a Q&A time. So feel free to submit your questions. We'll hang out for just a minute or two. And if not, everyone can, of course, shoot Joe an email or always shoot me an email as well. I'll include my email in the follow-up in case anyone has any questions for myself as well. All right. This has been such a great class. I know Friday afternoon, kind of keeping everyone engaged and everyone's looking forward to the weekend. So yeah, thank you again, Joe, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And everybody, again, who's listening, live or recording, thanks for being here. Feel free to email me anytime. Keep up the great work at your nonprofit.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. And yeah, we'll be in touch soon. All right. Take care, everybody.